Montana Territory, July 1884. The river was cold and she did not care. Elira Thorne stood knee-deep in the rushing current of the Yellowstone, the hem of her faded skirt soaked and clinging to her legs. Her boots were downstream somewhere she had not noticed when they'd slipped off. The sun was high, warm above the trees, but she felt none of it. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her eyes were fixed on the water sliding past, on the rocks beneath, on nothing at all. Behind her, the wind tugged at the cotton of her blouse, drying tears she had not wiped away. She should have cried more. Or screamed. But her voice had gone quiet after the last goodbye, after the last broken promise, after the wagon took her children and rolled east without her. Ma says there's no room for a woman who can't keep a home. The words echoed in her mind as sharp now as they had been 3 days ago when her mother-in-law packed up the children Zadie. Only 5 and Zeke. Just 3 and told Elira she was not fit to be their mother. There had been no fight. No lawman to stop it. Just a widow with an empty farm, no money, and no one left to speak on her behalf. So she had walked. For miles. Until the land opened wide and the river beckoned. Elira! A man's voice cut into the quiet like a shot. She turned her head slowly, blinking against the sun. A figure on horseback was coming fast from the ridge, dust rising behind him. She did not move. Let him pass, she thought. Let him not see. But he did. The horse skidded to a stop on the riverbank, hooves churning the dry grass. The man dismounted quick, dropping the reins. He was young, maybe 30, with sunburned skin and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, his hands rough and calloused. "Miss, you all right?" he called, stepping into the shallows. She turned away. He kept coming. The water surged around his boots, but he did not slow. When he reached her, he stopped just a foot away. "You planning on going deeper?" he asked softly. "I was not planning anything," she said. He watched her for a long moment, then held out a hand. "Come on. Let me help you out." She looked down at it. Strong fingers. Dirt under the nails. She had done nothing to earn kindness. And yet, she took it. He pulled her gently, steadying her as she stumbled over the rocks. When they reached the shore, he guided her to a fallen log and sat beside her, not too close. "I am Orin Boone," he said. "I was riding fence for the Bardee Ranch. Saw you from the ridge. Figured something was not right." She stared at her hands. "I did not mean to pry," he said after a moment, "but you looked lost out there." "I am," she whispered. He nodded, not asking more. After a minute, he pulled a kerchief from his pocket and held it out. She took it, wiping the river from her cheeks. "You from around here?" he asked. "I was. My husband passed last year. I tried to hold the farm, but it is gone now." He waited. "My children were taken by their grandmother. She said they would be better off." She did not say it kindly. Elira expected him to pull back like others did, but he only leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That is a hard thing," he said. "You miss them. Every breath." Silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. "Just real." "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. "No," he turned to look at her. His eyes were green, sharp and kind at once. "Then come with me." She blinked. "What?" "I have a bunkhouse on the edge of my land. Empty. Safe. You can stay there, just until you figure out what is next." "I cannot pay." "I did not ask for that." She studied him. He did not look like a man with an angle. He looked like someone who had seen storms and still built fences anyway. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, small, warm. "Good." The ride to his place was quiet. She sat behind him on the horse, her arms lightly around his waist, and for the first time in days, she felt the shape of something solid beneath her. His land stretched wide, flat pastures hemmed by pine. The bunkhouse was small but clean, with a cot, a stove, and a window that faced the trees. "I will bring you supper," he said as he stepped back outside. "And I will not let you go hungry." She watched him walk away, the sun behind him. And for the first time since the wagon rolled away, she felt something stir in her chest. Hope. That night, she sat by the small stove, a bowl of stew in her hands. Orin had made it himself: elk meat, potatoes, carrots. There had been fresh bread too. She was not used to this kind of care. Not without cost. But he had asked for nothing. Just left her with a soft, "Good night, Elira." She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. The river still moved through her mind, but now it was farther off. The next morning he was there with coffee and eggs. He asked if she wanted to help mend the fence. She said yes. By the end of the week, she was rising before dawn, pulling on borrowed clothes, and walking beside him as the sun lit up the hills. He showed her how to set posts, how to boil coffee on an open fire, how to listen for the signs of a storm. He never pushed, never asked for her story again, but he looked at her like she mattered, like she was not broken. One night, they sat on the porch watching the sky turn gold. "My children," she said suddenly. "Their names are Zadie and Zeke." He turned to her, quiet. "I want them back." He nodded. "Then we will get them back." She stared at him. "Why would you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I want to." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Elira," he said gently, "you are not alone anymore." She looked at him, then really looked, and something opened in her. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight her heart beat steady, because a kind cowboy had pulled her from the river. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe in hope again. The cottonwood trees along Orin's west pasture whispered against the wind, their leaves shaking like quiet thoughts. Elira walked behind him, her hands aching from the weight of the wooden bucket filled with fencing nails. Orin carried the post maul on one shoulder and a coil of wire in the other hand, his steps unhurried over the uneven ground. He glanced back once. "You holding up?" She shifted the bucket to her other hand. "I'll manage. You don't have to prove anything to me. I'm not trying to." He nodded once and kept walking. By late afternoon, they'd raised 9 new posts and strung wire between 6 of them. Her palms were raw, and her back throbbed, but she hadn't asked for rest. She didn't want to be idle, not while her children were somewhere unfamiliar, their lives reshaped without her. They sat beneath a wind-shorn pine to share the bread and salted pork he'd packed. Orin chewed thoughtfully, then said, "There's a lawyer in Livingston. Comrade Jude. He handles land disputes and custody matters." Elira stared at the horizon where the ridges softened into blue. "I've no money for a lawyer. I didn't ask if you had." Her voice dropped. "He won't take a case for nothing. I'll ride into town in 2 days. I'll speak to him. If he can help, I'll find a way to square it." She turned to him, her brow knitting. "Why would you do that?" He wiped his mouth with the edge of his sleeve. "Because I meant what I said. If you want them back, we start with what's possible." Her breath caught for an instant, then steadied. "You don't know what kind of woman I've been." He looked at her, unmoving. "I know what kind of woman you are now." They sat without speaking for some time after that, the wind soft through the grass. That evening, as the sky turned the color of ash and rose, Elira walked the edge of the creek behind the bunkhouse. Her skirts brushed the wild sage, and her fingers trailed the tops of the taller grasses. She stopped when the cricket song rose, the first sign of night creeping close. From the house, Orin's voice called out, "There's a letter here." Came with the ranch supplies. She turned back. He stood on the porch, envelope in hand, her name written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. She took it and sat on the steps to open it. Orin didn't press near, only waited a short distance away, arms crossed. She scanned the paper, her lips parted slightly as she read. "It's from Mrs. Latch, my neighbor back east. She says the children cry for me every night. That Zadie won't eat unless someone hums to her." Orin stepped closer. "You knew her well?" She kept to herself mostly. "But she's kind underneath it. She says my mother-in-law's boy has been coming by the house when he's drunk. That she's scared for the children." Orin's jaw tightened. "That's enough to raise concern with the court." "I need to go," Elira said softly. "I can't stay here while they're afraid. You'll need proof, a statement. I can ride to Livingston, send a wire to Mrs. Latch. Ask her to write what she knows, sign it." Elira looked up at him then. The porch light caught the lines beside his eyes, the quiet surety in his stance. "You think of everything. I try to think of what matters." She stood, folding the letter carefully. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't ridden down that hill. You don't have to know. His voice was low. You're here now. They stood close in the dusk, and for a moment, neither moved. Later, as she lay on the cot and the wind pressed against the shutters, she thought of the way his voice changed when he said her name. Not softer, but steadier, as though he were anchoring it to something lasting. That night, she didn't dream of water. She dreamed of a small house with morning light spilling across wooden floors and the sound of laughter, two high, bright voices and one low, warm one. And for the first time since she'd been left behind, the dream didn't vanish when she opened her eyes. The wind had shifted by the time Orin returned from Livingston. It blew from the north now, sharp with the scent of dry pine and dust, rattling the edge of the larder roof with a steady clatter. Elira stood at the table in the main house, slicing parsnips into a pot that already held a rabbit he'd trapped the week before. She'd kept her hands busy while he was gone, but her thoughts had run wild in all directions, like a team unhitched too soon. When he stepped through the door, she didn't turn right away. I spoke with Conrad Jude, he said, setting his hat down near the stovepipe. He'll take the case. She turned then, the knife halting mid-slice. Did he say what it would take? Statement from the neighbor, which we're waiting on. Affidavit from me, about what you've told me and what I've seen. And a petition to the territorial court. He paused. There's a hearing in Bozeman come September. He thinks we can be on the docket. She leaned against the table edge, her breath shallow. That's not far off. We'll be ready. He watched her face. You don't need to figure it all tonight. But we've got a path now. She nodded slowly. Then, after a beat, did you eat? Not yet. I'll finish the stew. They didn't speak much over supper. He took 2 bowls and half a loaf of bread, and she poured them both water from the rain barrel. When they were done, he stood to clear the table, but she stopped him. Let me. He hesitated, then stepped back. You sure? I need to do something with my hands, she said. Or I'll start imagining every way it can go wrong. He rested his back against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. You always cook when you're nervous? I was raised by a woman who believed quiet kitchens meant slacking. I learned to peel potatoes when I was 5 and to keep my fears inside the dough. He gave a soft huff through his nose. My mother believed idle hands led to mischief. She kept us hauling water even in rain. She's still living? No. Fever took her one spring. I was 16. She glanced over. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but I still hear her sometimes when I'm about to cut a corner. Elira rinsed the pot, her sleeves damp from the basin. I used to think I'd die young. Before the war ended, I saw too many women buried before 20. He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his boots. But you didn't. No, she said. Which means something, I suppose. I just don't know what yet. Maybe it means you're not through changing things. She dried her hands on a cloth and turned toward him. You talk like someone who's seen a lot change. I've seen enough. Enough to know things don't stay broken forever. She held his gaze. Even people? Especially them. The lantern flickered above, casting a soft golden light between them. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there looking at him like she was learning something she hadn't dared hope for. Then she said, low and even, there's a part of me that still don't believe I deserve to have them back. He stepped forward, not touching her but near enough she could feel the warmth off his skin. That part is lying to you. She breathed in, slow and steady, and it felt like the first full breath she'd taken all day. Later that night, after the fire had gone low, she stepped outside and walked the short path between the bunkhouse and the barn. The stars were dense overhead, crowding the sky in quiet glory. She leaned against the fence where the horses dozed, watching her breath fog in the cool air. Orin emerged from the shadows near the barn, carrying a saddle blanket he'd forgotten earlier. He spotted her and stopped a few feet off. Couldn't sleep, she shook her head. Thinking too much. He walked over, set the blanket on the rail. I could show you something. She arched an eyebrow, wary but curious. What sort of something? He pointed up. See that cluster there? Just above the cottonwoods. She followed his line. I see it. That's the summer triangle. My father taught me how to find it, said no matter where you end up, those 3 stars will always be there in summer. She tilted her head. Why'd he teach you that? So I'd know how to get home. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quiet as breath, she said, thank you for not asking me to be different than I am. I wouldn't know how, he said. You're not like anyone else. She turned to face him fully. Neither are you. They stood there in the hush of late night, the world stretched wide around them as if the land itself were listening. When their hands brushed, they didn't pull away. And when she leaned her head against his shoulder, he let it happen like it was the most natural thing in the world. By mid-August, the fields had turned the color of old gold, and the air carried the brittle scent of late summer sun-baked soil, distant smoke from someone's burn pile, the first whisper of autumn riding the breeze. Elira knelt in the garden beside the main house, coaxing beans from their dry pods with careful fingers. The vines were nearly spent, their yield lean, but she gathered what she could. Nothing wasted. Not anymore. Orin was out with the ranch hands that morning, driving a small herd of strays back from the North Ridge. The bunkhouse sat quiet behind her, a wash of clothes drying on the line. She stood and wiped her palms on her skirts, then moved toward the porch when the sound of hoofbeats rose from the far trail. She stepped into the shadow of the doorway just as a rider appeared around the bend, an older man in a dust-covered coat, his mount slow-stepping and tired. He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left side. Ma'am, he said, removing his hat. You Elira Thorne? Her breath caught, but she answered. I am. Who are you? Name's Simeon Latch. My wife told me you might need help. Elira's eyes widened. You're from Ellensburg. Yes, ma'am. Took a while, but I figured if she was willing to write, I ought to be willing to ride. She stepped off the porch, the dirt warm under her bare feet. Why would you come all this way? Simeon glanced at the mountains behind her, then back. Because my wife says you're owed your children, and I believe her. I seen what's happened to them since they were taken. That boy your husband's brother, he's not right. And my wife's taken to keeping the little ones overnight when she can. Elira's throat tightened. You're willing to speak that to a court? I'll do more than speak it. I brought a signed statement and I'll testify in person if needed. She reached for the porch rail to steady herself. You don't know what this means. I think I do. He shifted his weight. You got a man here you trust? She nodded slowly. Then let him ride with me. I'll wait a day or 2 and we'll go together. You'll need someone beside you in Bozeman. When Orin returned later that afternoon, dust-covered and sweat-soaked, she met him at the gate. Simeon Latch is here, she said. He brought a statement. Orin dismounted in one smooth motion. He'll testify? He's willing to ride with you to Bozeman. Says he'll wait a day or 2. Orin nodded once. Then we'll ride day after next. I'll speak to the lawyer myself, make sure it's filed proper. She hesitated, then asked, will you tell them what you've seen? About me? I will, he said. Truthful and plain. That night, she found herself unable to sleep. The bunkhouse felt too still, as if holding its breath. She walked out into the yard barefoot, the earth cool beneath her soles. Orin sat on the porch rail, sharpening a blade by lantern light. She stopped a few feet away. You think we have a real chance? He didn't look up. I do. You're not humoring me? He set the blade down. I wouldn't waste your time with false comfort. She stepped closer. What if they say I'm not enough on my own? That I've no land, no family fit to raise them with? He studied her face in the low light. Then we give them a different answer. Her voice shook. What kind? I've got more land than I use. A house with more room than I need. If you wanted to, we could make it theirs too. She stared at him, stunned still. I'm not asking you to decide now, he said. But I want you to know the offer's not pity. It's not rescue. It's something steadier. She reached out then, slowly, and placed her hand against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat was strong and certain. I've never been offered anything steady, she whispered. There's a first for everything. She leaned in, not rushed, not uncertain, and he met her halfway. Their kiss wasn't urgent. It was quiet, lasting, the kind that carries a promise even before the words are spoken. When they parted, she stayed close. I do want that. A home, a life. With you. Orin's hand slid gently along her back. Then we'll build it. Above them, the stars wheeled silently over the dark hills. And for the first time in all her remembering, Elira felt not just hope but belonging. The train whistled long and low as it pulled into the Bozeman station, steam hissing across the gravel lot in wide, curling sheets. Elira stood just beyond the platform with her hands clasped tightly around the worn strap of her satchel. Her boots were clean, her dress pressed as best as it could be after a day-long wagon ride and a night spent in a boarding house filled with the scent of boiled cabbage and coal ash. She had not slept much, but her spine was straight and her chin high. Orin stood beside her in a dark coat she hadn't seen him wear before. It had belonged to his father, he'd said earlier that morning, and the way he wore it made him look like someone who could not be moved by small things. She was grateful for that because what they were about to do was not small. Simeon Latch joined them near the station gate, brushing dust from his sleeves. Conrad's waiting at the courthouse, he said, glancing toward the road. He's got the judge's ear. Says it's best if we're there before midday. Elira gave a tight nod. Then we shouldn't waste time. They crossed town together, the wagon creaking beneath them as Orin guided the team with steady hands. Elira sat between them, the city unfolding around her in neat rows of brick and timber. She remembered Bozeman from years ago, but it had grown since then. Still, the air here felt cleaner than she remembered, the light sharper. Or maybe she was just seeing it differently now. Inside the courthouse, the wood-paneled walls smelled of polish and ink. Elira sat quietly while Conrad Jude went through the final documents with Orin and Simeon in another room. She kept her eyes on the window, where a bird hopped along the sill outside, pecking at something unseen. When they called her in, she walked with measured steps. The judge was an older man with a silver beard and a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. But he listened without interrupting. Conrad read the statement aloud. Then Simeon spoke, his voice calm as he recounted what he'd seen and heard back in Ellensburg. Orin stood last, and though he kept his words simple, each one landed with weight. She never once asked for anything she didn't earn, he said, his gaze steady. All she wants is to raise her children where they're safe. I've seen how she works, how she carries herself. She's not looking for charity. She's looking for her family. The judge didn't speak for a long moment. Then he looked down, signed the paper, and passed it to Conrad. Guardianship is awarded to Mrs. Thorne with full custody reinstated. The children are to be returned to her care within 10 days. Elira didn't cry. She bowed her head once, then turned and walked out with her shoulders squared. It wasn't until they reached the steps outside that she stopped and pressed one hand to her chest. Orin touched her elbow gently. You all right? I'm trying to believe it. You will. They rode back to the ranch 2 days later, the wind behind them and the hills glowing with late summer light. Simeon left them at the fork in the road, headed east for the long return to his wife. Elira embraced him before he mounted, her arms fierce around his shoulders. You've given me more than I know how to repay, she said. Raise them well, he replied. That's enough. The days that followed passed like breath. Letters were sent, arrangements made, and when the morning came that the children arrived by wagon driven by Conrad's own cousin, who'd agreed to fetch them from Ellensburg, Elira stood in the doorway with her hands trembling. Zadie tumbled down first, her cheeks flushed and her braids crooked. Mama! Elira fell to her knees as Zadie ran into her arms, and behind her came Zeke, slower, blinking at the light. Orin lifted the boy gently, resting him against his chest until he reached his mother's arms. They stayed like that for a long while, pressed together in the dirt, the scent of dust and sun-warmed cotton filling the air. That night, they ate together at the long table Orin had built years ago and never used for more than one. Zadie hummed while she chewed, and Zeke clutched a small wooden horse Orin had carved the day before. Elira sat with one child against each side, her shoulders finally eased of their old weight. After the children were asleep, She stepped out onto the porch where Orin waited, his arms crossed loosely as he watched the sky. "They're already different," she said. "Lighter somehow. They know they're home." She leaned against the post, arms folded. "You've given them more than land. You gave them a father's steadiness." He looked at her carefully. "Only if you want that for them. And for you." Elira stepped closer. "I do," she said. "I want a life with you. Full and real." He reached for her hand and she let him fold it into his. "Then we start tomorrow." They were married the following week in the clearing behind the house beneath a stretch of open sky. Zadie wove flowers into her mother's hair, and Zeke stood beside Orin, holding one corner of the folded quilt that served as an altar. The ceremony was short, but the promises made were long and deep. They built their days around small things. Mending boots, watching clouds roll in from the west, teaching Zadie how to read from the Bible her father had left behind, letting Zeke carry water in a tin pail not quite his size. They carved out joy not all at once, but in pieces they could hold. When winter came, they stacked wood high and filled the house with warmth. Orin took to carrying Zeke on his shoulders during chores, and Elira taught Zadie to sew with cloth scraps from her old dresses. There were nights when the wind howled through the cracks, but inside, the lamp burned steady. And so did they. Years passed. The children grew tall and sure. The ranch held steady, and so did the love that had begun beside a cold river and found its shape beside a fire. Elira never forgot the ache of those lost months, but they no longer defined her. She had known sorrow, but she had chosen something else, a man who never asked her to be less, a home that never asked her to leave, and a life she had built with her own hands, full of grace, full of truth. And always, when the stars rose and the wind slipped through the cottonwoods, Orin would take her hand and she would hold it like a promise already kept.